welcome to Afterthoughts. This is the podcast where we give you your thoughts after we have watched something, usually movies, hopefully movies. I am your host tonight, Ryan King. I'm going to go ahead and get into introductions before we get into what we watched or any jokes or anything. But joining me is the usual, John Garcia.
Hey, did I hear you say we're going to give them their thoughts? I feel like you said we're going to give you your thoughts. Which I'm totally fine with. I feel like after...
We have read your minds, and we are going to spoon feed you what you already know.
Now about to deliver this movie that is titled like a Dr. Seuss book.
Who knows?
I'm
Who knows what I said? Yeah, who knows what I don't know what I say.
Not even he knows what he says.
Yeah,
anymore.
I haven't even had anything to drink yet, and who knows?
I'm ready for it. This movie obviously rocked you. That's why.
It did. I do like the music quite a bit. Also joining us, you hear the voice of Michael Dixon.
What's up? I'm excited to talk about this movie. It was quite an experience.
Yes, and yes. I want the record to show that Dixon was right. And we'll talk about what he's right about after Ryan
about
introduces him. Yeah, we'll talk about what he's right about briefly after Ryan's introduction.
He was partly right.
He was
one of the...
He was technically correct. The best kind of
right.
correct.
Yeah.
Yes, we are talking about, what is it, 6 inches forward, 6 inches back.
5 inches back.
5 inches back. Yeah, 6 inches forward, 5 inches back. Hedwig and the Angry Inch from 2001.
Ladies and gentlemen, whether you like it or not.
Ow!
Hedwig!
Don't you know me, Kansas City? I'm the new Berlin Wall. Try and tear me down. How did some slip of a girly boy become the internationally ignored song stylist barely standing before you?
Damn, handsome. I can't believe you're not a girl.
Looks like we got some sugar daddies in the house. You could give me a cavity, honey. Now you're interested, huh?
Inch, not itch.
One day in the late mid-'80s, I was in my early late 20s.
I never knew that woman before that night, and I never knew she wasn't a woman.
I've got a sweet tooth. Songs exploded out of us. We were outgrossing monster trucks in Wichita. When it comes to huge openings, a lot of people think of me. I had tried singing once, and they threw tomatoes. So after the show, I had a nice salad. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, both of you. Did you put a bra in a dryer? Yes. How many times do I have to tell you? You don't put a bra in a dryer!
This is John Cameron Mitchell's movie adaptation of John Cameron Mitchell's off-Broadway at the time play. And I don't know where the book fell, if he wrote the book and then the play of the book or whatever.
There's a book?
Yeah, mainly this is an adaptation of the play because it's about the music.
Is it a pop-up book?
Yeah, and you can't hear it. Yeah,
it has a little slider for the angry inch.
6 inches forward, 5 inches back.
Their wig. Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh man, a pop-up book would be awesome though.
I think during Pride Month, I was thinking about movies to watch and kind of recognizing that there's not a lot of good ones, particularly if you go back even to something like this in 2001. It's still tough to get something to the public's eye that doesn't age poorly. Often we have actors that don't typify the role. I'm talking to you, Sean Penn. And so this is something that at the time in 2001, I saw this in the theater. I do feel like it was representative of the struggle that someone can have with their sexual identity, with their gender identity. Looking, and I wanted to kind of go back and be like, is it still the case? Is this something that I feel like someone in the community would be mostly okay with, from the time period? I remember enjoying it. I remember enjoying the music, and I kind of wanted to go back because I do think it's something I see kind of controversially. People who look back and really liked it and said it was really important to them in their growth, and people who are like, no, it's dated and maybe even is transphobic in some ways. So I think it's interesting for us to talk about it. At the top, we're all cisgendered white men, if you have been listening to this podcast. I can't even be like, oh, I have friends or whatever, because that's just what white people say to make themselves feel okay talking about something. So we're gonna do our best to see it from our angle, and talk about this openly, knowing that even this movie offends some people and doesn't offend some people in the same community. It is something that's open to interpretation. We'll do our best with pronouns, but it's very confusing in this movie because Hedwig kind of uses one more, but it presents a little bit differently. And his, I don't know, girlfriend, wife, boyfriend, whatever, also never gives us a gender identity throughout all of it. So it's a bit of a thing. So we'll try our best.
She calls him her man Friday. So I think that's all we get.
Yeah, I honestly, her man Fred is a pretty nice way to refer to him.
Yeah, her man
I don't know. I like the sound of it.
Yeah. And if we mix up pronouns, I probably have mixed them up in previous ones. So if that bothered you or not, I don't know.
If you get mad about Ryan saying the wrong word, then this is not the podcast for you.
yes. This is not a good one. Yes. Thank you. Rick, welcome to Thoughts After. This is the podcast where we mess up words. So going back and revisiting, this is the second time. The first time I saw it was at the movie theater when it came out, me and about 8 other people, because it was a small indie thing. And I definitely really enjoyed it. I think I was in a point, this is college, this was my freshman year of college, that even I was grappling with my own identity. You're at that age where you're kind of like had your parents' ideology, your community's ideology for so long, and then you're kind of opened up, in particular going to Austin, Texas, for me, definitely a culture shift from some of where I had lived. South Park for a lot, honestly, my life.
Colorado?
In Colorado, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know
where
that.
I lived in Colorado was a lot like South Park. And I think that this and other things I watched at the time did help me kind of like begin to think about other things and think about other people's situations. Watching it again, I do feel like it does really nail, if you look at it, a character's struggle with their identity. And if you can just take it at face value of like this character and their situation and their struggle, I think it works. I think it works perfectly. And it's a very interesting look at, especially this having gone through a time period where they came from, coming into the States from Germany, from East Germany. There's a lot to unpack. And on top of it, the music is great. There's some interesting use of like color and some things in the flashbacks, as well from a movie making perspective. It's an indie film. Like you can kind of tell, like it's an indie film on kind of an indie budget, but it's about a band. So you can film it in places that bands are. Basically the plot is, our main character, Hedwig, who actually wasn't born Hedwig. That's his mother's name that he took the passport of to escape East Germany, and then has been going by Hedwig since. Growing up, his mom took him over to East Germany. Not a great relationship with his parents. His playtime was in an oven.
Yeah.
He falls in love, maybe groomed. You could look at it with a GI who Hedwig marries in order to get out of East Germany, but in order to make it out from the clear, goes through a sexual transition that leaves Hedwig with an angry inch, and not much else, apparently. I think even says like Barbie doll, Ken doll kind of thing at one point too, right? And that, along with the sexual identity, kind of Hedwig continues struggling with the relationships. We find out about a relationship that he had in starting a band. Then that person, Tommy Gnosis, as he's known, goes on to steal Hedwig's songs and become a star, where Hedwig is still trying to chase him out and get credit for all of it. And kind of through all of this, we're kind of being flashback and coming back to sort of a presence back and forth as Hedwig kind of in the music tells us the story, but also like stops and talks to the audience. So I think on watching it again, I enjoyed it. I still felt it was definitely an interesting watch, and it is a good character piece for sure. John, what was your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I really enjoyed this movie. I had a great time with the music. I dug the vibe of it. Pretty much the moment that it started, I sort of knew that I was going to enjoy this. The constant pauses where we would get some time to talk with like Hedwig talking to us, like getting to be basically one of the constant audience members at all of the shows for Hedwig and the Angry Inch was fun. It was also just fun to see crowd shots that are interspliced, having like the old people that are always just like, what the fuck is this? Or why is this?
Yeah,
and like the different venues that they play at are hilarious.
It's like a diner with 5 people sitting there. Yeah.
It was like a fish themed diner at one point and some other stuff. And seeing some of the camera work that was done in a really inventive way was cool. Like being kind of rotated around within the oven was nice, like cool touch. They had really cool wide shots at times that staged just how sort of on their own the band was and how little of a following they actually have, despite having all these rad songs. And it was one of those things that I feel like also set itself up really well by showing at the very beginning that like Tommy Gnosis already does their songs. And that sort of explains to the logic side of my brain why they don't have as big of a crowd. One of the things that I always will fight in a musical is if there's somebody who has like absolute banger after banger of a song and they have no crowd and people are telling them they're talentless and that they're never going to make it. I'm like, but they clearly would like have a following by now. Yeah. Like they would have at least a small following that would love all of the things they do. And I feel like it's all tightly explained here and in a way that allows the characters to actually breathe and just kind of move past that. I enjoyed getting those flashbacks. This movie actually reminds me a lot of Potato Dreams of America.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
Which has a similar kind of theme of trying to find your identity, your sexual identity, and also has the immigrated to America story within it. And so it's fascinating to kind of put it into that lens and think about it because those movies are about 20 years apart. But yeah, I loved it. I love the music. I was listening to the album today. I'm definitely, on board with watching it again at some point soon. And, I don't really think that there's anything else that I can add on top of it other than to your point, Ryan. Yes, I am a cis white man who has not read any real gender theory. So this feels like one of those episodes where we're like dangerously going to stumble around areas. And I'm just like, I'm just going to do my best. Okay. I'm going to try to be positive. But yeah, it was fun. I had a good time.
Yeah. Awesome. Dixon?
Cool. Yeah. I had a lot of fun with this as well. The performances are great. The songs are really well written. They're really well performed. It is funny seeing them perform in these little dive bars or even just like family restaurants that don't have that many people in them. And they're always right next to a Tommy Gnosis concert to the point where like you can just open the door of the restaurant and hear Tommy Gnosis performing pretty loudly right there.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of interesting ideas in this. There's also really cool animation sequences in the performances, like these kind of music videos that are put together. And the stories that are told in each of the songs are so fascinating. Like there's one about this theory about how, it used to be that, there were 3 genders and human beings each had like 2 heads and 2 sets of arms and 2 sets of legs. And like either you were like 2 men, 2 women, or a man and a woman put together, and then at some point like we angered God or something, and he like Zeus shot lightning bolts down and split everybody into in two, and now we're like trying to find our other half. And it's like that's a really interesting poetic idea of like, trying to find, the one, so to speak, in the world, like the person that you were meant to be joined up with but have been separated from. And there are a lot of, every song is just so vivid, and there's just really interesting, rich stories in all of them. I thought John Cameron Mitchell was great in the role. Stephen Trask writing the music was really cool. I saw a feature on Criterion Channel where this music critic was interviewing Stephen Trask, and he was like, "Can you talk about how you were influenced by Rocky Horror?" And he was like, "I wasn't. I just really like the Beatles, and I just like pulled a lot from the Beatles." And I was like, "Okay, that's interesting. Like, you wrote a lot of good rock songs. So yeah, that's kind of cool." But yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting ideas in this movie. I'm interested to kind of unpack it with you guys. I think the concept of Tommy Gnosis kind of ripping off all of Hedwig's stuff, I think is interesting. Like when we talked about Rocky Horror, we talked about how the costume designer of that movie claimed to have invented punk rock and that it was just like stolen after that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can see how, there may be like people in the queer community who, have started trends or fads that were then kind of like appropriated by straight dudes that made them famous and popular. And you have kind of the people on the creative edge of that movement getting stuck without any recognition or any money from that. And I thought that was an interesting idea. That I don't know if that's what they were trying to say, but I thought that was an interesting kind of aspect of the film. But yeah, I had a really great time with it. The music kicks ass, and it's a fun watch.
Yeah. Now, I hadn't thought about that like appropriation angle. That is interesting to look at. There is also the angle of Tommy Gnosis like more readily being accepted by society.
Right.
Right. That like Hedwig presents in a way that is too much. There does always seem to be a brawl. There's several brawls that break out with the crowd at times too. Very punk rock, seeing that Hedwig's group is willing to tussle with people. It is built around this idea of duality, the opening song and closing song, and then of course the lyrics come back up, is this play. I think it's Plato's Symposium. One of the stories in there is this story of the different genders and the sun, the moon, I forget what the third one is, that the gods get like upset and split them up. And we also hear Tommy Gnosis talk about Adam and Eve, because he's a completely Jesus camp kid when he first meets Hedwig. And so this idea of like man and woman being some sort of two sides of a coin, and the confusion, and this idea, which is what was in Symposium, of like the reason love is so important is it makes you feel whole, and that there's some searching or some longing. And that's an idea we see like all over many cultures, of this like the red string that connects you, that to your partner, or this, one in a lifetime love, or love through alternate dimensions, or whatever, that there's this like perfect person out there that completes you. And really I feel like the ending, Hedwig accepts himself, and that's when he's whole. And that it's kind of this like recognition of like, I was looking for it in all these other things, and I needed to be okay with myself, which is a really, really good message, a really good mental message. And a message, I think, even to the queer community, of like being okay with yourself is kind of the first step in being okay and being out, and not having to be concerned with other people accepting you, getting yourself to the right place first.
Yeah, for sure.
I do think that the questionable part, and Rocky Horror has, I think we did touch on that as well, a love and hate relationship with the community. There, you could take an interpretation of this movie where Hedwig is forced into sexual surgery in order to get out, as kind of a cover for being gay, and that it's like a way to sort of like attempt to fix. But in the movie, I feel like it's really just presented like not his choice. He's obviously upset about it over the years, and struggles with it. And that's The Angry Inch. He names his band The Angry Inch. The major song and the climax of the movie is The Angry Inch, where he sings about his angry inch angrily. It's, it's something that isn't accepted by Hedwig fully, right, through this, until he can kind of get to like, it happened, and he has these masculine and feminine traits within himself.
Yeah, I saw an interview with John Cameron Mitchell where he was talking about how when he was kind of exploring the idea of doing the movie, he had this idea, but he didn't want to do a drag thing, and he was kind of uncomfortable with his femininity. Even as an out gay man, he was just kind of uncomfortable going that direction. And he felt like actually doing it and going through with it was a really healthy exploration of his own sexuality and like learning about who he was as a person. And, you know, it was a really positive experience for him. And he said, basically, like, after that, I felt like I didn't need to act anymore because I felt like I was acting to try to tap into, you know, some sort of profound essence. And I felt like I learned so much about myself doing that I didn't feel the need to do that anymore. And so he kind of moved more into writing and directing after that. And he's like, you know, I still act sometimes just for fun if like a fun part comes up, but I don't do it out of any sort of like need to find myself. So I thought that was interesting to hear.
And Mitchell is we failed to mention that, not only director, co-writer, but also star as Hedwig, and was the star on the off-Broadway original version of this. The later Broadway version was Neil Patrick Harris, which is an interesting turn, and won a Tony, I believe. So yeah, it's had life even since then. I think it still plays like off Broadway and around. It's still something that's out there. And since then, Mitchell and Trask have come out as non-binary both as well. And in 2001, you know, I feel like this is a point you could start to have the conversation and potentially be out, but it's certainly not comfortable being trans now, much less 2001, much less something in like Eastern Germany and before the Berlin Wall comes down. So that, you know, to really look at it from that perspective of Hedwig having gone through a time where being gay, being trans, being a drag queen, all of these things were questionable and physically dangerous to you, even more so than today where they still are. I will say it's awfully drag queen-ish. I kind of feel like the decisions and the way that Mitchell plays Hedwig it has that the snappiness that a drag queen has, if you know what I mean. Like everything is kind of like a quick little quip or a joke.
They've got
with
jokes
a
and
tinge of
self-deprecating
sexual
jokes and innuendo is all over the place.
But it still works in my opinion.
Yeah, I feel like it's that. I guess it is that kind of performance is needed when you don't know who you are, like that identity you haven't defined yet. So you sort of have to, it makes sense to me that Hedwig in the context would do something that's a little bit more aligned with drag in performative art. If anytime that in the movie, it's like anytime that Hedwig has sort of shown a sensitive side, she's been betrayed. And so it just becomes this kind of like, all I can do is just get up on stage and kind of be who I am there and lash out and get into constant bar brawls and fights. And like, there's even parts of the movie where I wouldn't say that's necessarily romanticized, but it is sort of beautified, like how violent and aggressive the punk rock can be. It's like, I'm thinking of, I think right during the Angry Inch, like Hedwig takes like a stage dive over like people, like a man butchering a lobster, like brutalizing a lobster, Hereditary style. And it's like done in kind of a dolly shot sort of way of like floating over it, just gracefully flying over all this chaos and like overseeing it. And that to me kind of spoke to this, like, that is those moments. That's where Hedwig can find like a respite, can find some kind of peace, is being able to like lash out at people who don't really understand what she's struggling with, what she's dealing with. And it's not people she blames for it, but just anybody who kind of will listen. And you even get that in like the sequence on the tires, those like thrown away tires where Hedwig's just drunk and kind of ranting about Tommynosis to anybody who will listen, these people that are kind of captivated.
They're just
presence.
sitting on top of like the Springfield tire fire. For
Yeah.
some reason.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the punk rock music scene, 2001, it's probably dying or losing its soul, selling out. But it has always had that tinge of like purposely, and metal is this way too, right? Like part of the scene is the aggression. And you have like on the farthest scale, like Gigi Allen, like actively fighting with his audience, you know, wanting his audience to hurt him, mess with him, right? To like Iggy Pop a little bit too, even, right? Kind of like
Glenn Danzig getting knocked out cold on a floor.
yeah. So I think that and that is often a reflection that music is working out these things, right? A lot of the punk music is talking about political angst, governmental angst, teenage angst, right? All of it. So it does fit here, I feel like, with Hedwig for the music. It is somewhat punk music. I think that some of the songs, and I think the one talking about the original gender identity, that one's kind of like Broadway. There's not really a punk sound to it, but it's interesting to have the like different songs within this, like, so as a musical, like how do we feel it works? This is how I prefer a musical about music, where then everything is happening, we're listening to the musicians play music, and maybe we can like imagine some things or do some things. I like having the animation during some of the music sequences to kind of add and embellish on what's being told.
Yeah, I thought it really adds to the storytelling. It adds another dimension and makes it kind of more fun to follow. It breaks up the shots of the band performing are great, but it kind of helps to kind of make it less monotonous and just having that shot over and over.
Yeah, there's only so many diner sets you can go to before everybody's like, all right, we get it. And I mean, they break that up by having, I love when they go to the outdoor, like the field that's got like 5 outhouses.
Yeah, they're on stage like, number 9 at the like Women's Appreciation and Music Festival or something.
Yeah. But yeah, like they found so many creative ways to kind of break that up. And I feel like the animation also, it just adds that little splash of character to it. I always love seeing kind of these more hand animated. It has that like high school journal or like a personal journal kind of scratched feel to it. And we even see Hedwig writing in similar sort of like papers and everything. And it's just nice to see it have a consistent theme and sort of trend through the movie, as opposed to being sort of this bespoke. I can think of other movies where like they'll randomly just have like an animated scene and it doesn't feel consistent with the rest of the theme or the tone. And I'm failing to find the words to actually find which one of those movies I'm thinking of, but it's like, they do it for comedic purpose. Like it's like a minute of an animated sort. I just watched Freddy Got Fingered, and that just has like its own thing. And I was like, all right,
that movie's actively trying to hurt you. So
it's true. Yeah, that's true. But that one even had its own consistent drawing style, as opposed to, I guess more like I'm thinking comedic ones, like Anchorman has like random animated things for like a bit, and those kind of movies that it is a punchline, it is a laugh, it is not something that's woven in as well as like what we have here. I felt like I was watching like a Bowie music video during that Love Ballad thing too.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice, just there.
Are you saying like something like Grand Budapest Hotel, where it's like a throwaway?
Suddenly
have an animation. Yeah,
that's a much better. That or anything where it's like, oh, they suddenly go to stop motion for 5 seconds to get it surprised you. There you go.
Yeah, I think you're right. This fits with it, and then having it thematically tied to Hedwig's diary. Hedwig might be a unreliable narrator. We never really get any necessarily clarity on that. We are only getting it from them. I do like the telling the story like to the audience through the songs. I can see how this works as a stage play of, the music is there. You're sitting and telling the audience the story after each song, kind of going back. And as it's sort of a flashback, you can bring in the set pieces and the characters and play it out, and then kind of go back to the song and the stage. And so as a movie, I think it works that way too. It's very easy in the musical to then just like, hey, we cut back to East Berlin. And some of that in the flashbacks, it's interesting where you see him as a child, and then in the next shot, it's grown Hedwig, and then back to a child. Yeah. So also kind of playing with the identity within even Hedwig's memories. The oven shot was definitely that was interesting. That's one of those shots where I sit there and I'm like, okay, cool. How'd they do this? I'm like, it had to have been they got an oven, because this is a low budget movie. I'm like, they went to a yard and got a wrecked oven and sliced off part of it, right? And then stuck our camera, put our head in, and then rotated the camera on the shot. Like, that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. It's the only reasonable way. Yeah, the those flashback scenes, I mean, that's kind of what reminded me of I was mentioning Potato Dreams of America. I don't know how many people have seen that. I know Dixon and I have watched it because I lent it to you at one point. But they have kind of a similar low budget vibe where I'm realizing more and more that it is like on that independent scale, whatever you can find, whatever props you can build, as long as you keep the style consistent, as long as you keep to, like, you can be in a confined space, but if you know how to work the cameras, if you know how to do these shots, it'll make it like equally engaging. Cause like I'm thinking of, getting into the oven and kind of staring into the face of like young Hedwig and sort of having, that disconnect of like, okay, we're going to flash here and then we're going to show you the full room, how small it really was. And like, they have that filter over it to let you know that this is a flashback. And then immediately kind of going back into the oven and having like older Hedwig there sort of creates that disconnect of like, oh, like I can see this person like reliving their memories. This isn't just they're talking at me. I'm there with them. I'm kind of experiencing this. And I really liked the way that camera worked. This felt like such an intimate film. Like the entire time that I watched it, you know what it also reminded me of? It reminded me of like a better version of Cashback. Not like, I'm not even going to try to say that they're in league together or anything, but Cashback is the story of, again, a failed taxi driver. It's a Paul Schrader film that failed. Or I should say a Paul Schrader wannabe film. But it tries to create that similar intimacy where you're with the protagonist or the main character and you're going through an emotional time of strife with them. You're trying to figure out who they are, what they feel, what they stand for. And this one just does such a much more effective, like it utilizes exposition so much more effectively. It talks at you, but it feels like it's talking with you. And I feel like Cashback was always just talking at you the entire time. So it was kind of weird. The entire time I sat there, I was like, man, there's so many moments where it has what I used to feel with that movie. And now I feel it with this instead. And I think it's just because there's so many scenes where Hedwig just gets onto the side of the stage and sits down and takes like this casual approach to telling you a story and getting you into the songs. And I think that's also why I like it more as a musical, because it doesn't have the things that we all probably bemoan where, you know, like somebody's like, I'm going to go off to college. And then like the piano starts.
Nobody gets out of Chester Heights. Everyone that's born here, grows up here, starts a family here. I think you're crazy for wanting to go somewhere else.
Feels stupid to leave Chester Heights with nothing but a bag of bagels.
Nothing but a bag of bagels? Why, the whole world's a bag of bagels. Don't you see? Some folks go through life like an everything bagel, collecting bits and pieces everywhere they go. And some folks are cinnamon raisin. They're too sweet. Other folks are plain, a whole wheat, sourdough, sesame seed, poppy seed. Why, all the bagels of the rainbow.
And they're like, oh, I wonder what I'll see. And it's like, oh God, here we fucking go. There's going to be like so many college students dancing on this campus. Damn it. But yeah, like, I don't know. That's my take on kind of the way that those shots are used, the way that everything pulls you in, that intimate feeling it creates with you, and the way that I think that it kind of justifies having that musical number or those musical numbers hit so hard and kind of keep you going along.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to talk about, and we'll probably get into this later separately, what makes a musical work as a film, but also what makes a Broadway play transition to, or just generally a musical play transition to film.
Yeah.
I'm trying to kind of rack my brain for what's probably the biggest like Broadway to movie adaptation, like highest grossing or even maybe the best.
Les Mis?
It's not good. That's not a good one. So.
Oh yeah, sure.
Well, and that's actually interesting because that was part of what I was thinking is that Hedwig is on a low budget, and this is a movie that doesn't need a ton of money. It doesn't need to be. And the Les Mis and Cats are great examples of throwing too much money at something that really is not at that scale or need to be, and then it just gets even worse. Those might not be good musicals, though. You know, I'm sorry, everyone that's a theater kid.
You're gonna get some angry letters.
I can sing some of the Cats songs, but you have to truly admit it's just random nonsense.
It's
just music and random.
It's not
nonsense.
random nonsense. It's about a death cult that gets to sacrifice their favorite child into the sky.
Okay, fair. It is that
Perfectly reasonable.
I think it might be the best example of a song happens and everyone dances, and that's all Cats is. Like others at least attempt to have some transition to something else.
That's where I feel like I've never known what a musical is supposed to be. And that's a weird meta thing to have on this discussion about a movie about finding identity. I'm trying to find the identity of musicals. Like I've been on that quest of like, what makes a musical good? Obviously that's like a subjective thing, but I'm curious even within an objective scale, like trying to apply, the people who pull the like opera glasses up and they're like, we'll see how they fare in the third act of this musical. Like, I want to know what's going through your mind. Like, what are you rating? Are you like checking out how many different chords they're trying to hit? How many people sing at once? What harmonies there are? I don't even know how to judge. I remember a long time ago on this podcast, I talked about In the Heights. We all love In the Heights here, don't we? No, we don't. Nope. And I remember getting really confused and being like, Dixon was like, I need an answer. Is it a recommend or a refute? And I was like, it's probably good for people who like musicals. And you're like, that's not good enough. It's always something I've struggled with. And so when I find something like this, I'm like, I like this. I think I like musicals. Then I'll watch something like Cats and be like, I don't like musicals anymore. I want to go home.
It really all depends on the song quality.
Yeah.
If it's Cats, all the songs suck ass, then it's going to be bad.
Right. I think that it is the songs. It's how the songs are used within telling the story. I think part of it to me, I think I've decided Sound of Music is probably the biggest, because that still has cultural relevance.
I didn't even know that was a stage play.
It was a play first. And then I would say Grease is probably another really good, both of those have probably done way better as movies than they did as musicals. So that's even interesting. Sound of Music is because you can fucking film it in the Alps.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so that's a good example of what can you do with your medium that you couldn't have done as a play. Sound of Music is a great example of I can do a lot more. Cats, you can do a lot more, but why?
Yeah.
Right.
If you're not going to give us the butthole cut, why did we do this in the first
What are we here for? Sound of Music has a historical context. It takes place in a certain in Austria, and to actually film something either in Austria or something that looks like Austria adds to it and adds that depth to it. And so I think that's one part of transitioning it. What makes musicals work in general? I think, we've talked about it several times and always had a stab at it, and it's unclear to me. I do feel like that the difference between a movie with music and a musical is that there's some kind of thematic bits with the song, as well as the songs come back and are recontextualized.
Yeah.
That really on Broadway, there's kind of this you can go and put the formula down now. Something comes out and what do they have, the fucking Back to the Future, the musical, or whatever,
God.
that's out now, right? And I can tell you, I can piece apart the movie and be like, this is what's going to happen, this is where the dance number is going to be, right? And it's just they have it set of that's what a Broadway musical looks like, and part of that is the hey, we start with this song, we give you a hint of it, it comes back later and is more important and recontextualized or sung by somebody different, right? And then we hear some motifs of it every once in a while throughout, right?
Yeah. You just saying that Back to the Future had a musical popped up the worst tropes in my head of Marty running off stage and there being a shitty little flame fabric on the ground, and then the lights dim and he pops up and he's like, where am I? And it's on a big old billboard for the 1950s. All of those things. I'm just oh no, I'm
just picturing Christopher Lloyd singing to Marty everything
right. Yeah, the two of them dancing together hand in hand.
Oh God, Ryan! At the end, he says, "It's your kids, Marty," and then they break into a reprisal of every medley or the medley of every song before as they go off into Back to the Future too. Oh man. Well, I hate that. I'm not a big fan. I'm also it's weird because you talk about a movie, what makes a good musical into a good movie. like Disney's tried to make their movies, which are musicals, into stage musicals. And I'm like, but why? Like, what is this? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Where are you trying to capitalize
So
on
many
these
people
things?
love the Lion King musical. And I'm like, well, I don't understand what the point of that is. That seems so weird. Like, you just have people in lion costumes doing the same thing that they did in the animated movie. Like, I have no desire to see that.
I mean, it's not like Cats, where they're like all in Cats outfits.
Yeah.
I've seen the Lion King musical. I went one time and I was like, all right, that was interesting. But it's like in the same way that I'm curious to see that, what is that, the high school stage production of Alien, just because like it seems kind of rad to just like, all right, well, you made these props. That it reminds me of watching a movie that doesn't have a good plot. Not to say that like, I don't know, Lion King, it's Hamlet, it's classic stuff, but it's like watching a movie that doesn't have a good plot and just appreciating the practical aspects of it. Like, oh, they did a lot of stunts. They did these things. That's what I feel like when I go to see the theater now, where I'm like, oh, this is adapted from a Disney movie. I guess I'm just going to look at how close they got to like all the prosthetics or all this other stuff. But maybe it is like that. None of that's made for us. That's made for people who specifically just like to go to a live theater where there are live people and they don't like movies or they don't like these other things. It's just the mediums need to just spread all across each other and it's not all for us, which I'm fine with. But I'm also just like, I still feel like certain things only work in certain mediums. Like they only work well in certain mediums and contexts. And that's like what we've just been talking about. What makes a good musical transition to film? Well, it has to have something within it that justifies using the actual medium, like going to the Alps.
Being able to get off of a stage and outdoors and move, right? That you can't do. Yeah, I agree. I don't really understand it because there's not money in it. You know, like you already made your money on Lion King and it will pale in anything you ever make. And it's been on Broadway forever, maybe will always, and it still will never make the amount of money that Lion King will just continue to rake in. Yeah. Especially now that they're raking in money with these stupid remakes that also make no sense.
Now they're doing live action ones, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. But yeah, like why put it to that? It's the same thing where it's like comic books, you know, transitioning comic book movies. The comic book movie becomes the like true version of it because more eyes are on it than ever, right? And obviously, you can do a whole lot more as a medium in a live action movie than you can in a comic. Right? There's so many more things that has as a medium that it wouldn't make sense to be like, oh, they do it sort of, but to be like, oh, we're taking it and the sequel to this movie is going to be a comic book and think that anyone's going to give a fuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or that it would ever make you any money or anything. Right. It's like, why would you do that? So it's only like promotional copyright issues, I feel like, that were the reasons to do that kind of stuff. Is like, well, we got to do something with this license. We got to keep it in people's minds. It's work as a Broadway play, I guess. There are some, I do think with Lion King and the Spider-Man musical for like 3 weeks it existed. We're trying to, they were trying to do something technical. Yeah. They were trying to add something like a technical achievement to Broadway and then like bring in people with an IP that exists.
That feels like it needs to be like a Cirque du Soleil thing. Like you got to have some talented people doing a Spider-Man musical. You know, like
it shouldn't just be produced
closed
by
quickly
Regan
due to
Thompson.
injury, so that tells you exactly you're right. Yes.
It is interesting though, as I think about it, one of the oldest sort of musicals that's been adapted to film. It wasn't a film first. Phantom of the Opera was like a silent film. It's like a 4-hour silent film. And then it got transitioned to like, you know, once that audio could be, it's been like recreated so many different times.
There's a Claude Rains version from the 40s.
Yeah, it's like isn't there a Joel Schumacher version? I think
that's definitely been remade a lot.
Yeah. And it's just one of those where I'm like, I don't know how big of a deal is that, or who's the audience for it? Like all of these things just kind of get remade and like what stories are they telling that are that timeless? I mean, I'm not going to insult the Phantom of the Opera specifically, but just like some of these movies, it's like, who is the demographic? It's just musical theater. Like when I watch something like Hedwig and the Angry Inch, to me, it has everything that I want in a film that has music in it, like that is a musical. It tells a story about a character. It's something that's engaging. Most of the other stuff usually ends up being kind of this boilerplate. Let's do a cookie cutter story about a kid who's nervous to go off to camp, or a man who happens to be in the Heights and is trying to find himself and a girlfriend. And like, let's just infuse a bunch of music into that. I was watching half of Encanto the other day and I stopped, and I'll resume it eventually. But like halfway through that, I was like, why do we need all of the music for all of these characters? Why do we need any of, I don't know. It just felt like,
because no one can say no to Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's gone too far. He can't be stopped now. He needs an editor. He needs to be reined in, but no one will do it. He's too powerful.
Oh my God. Yeah, it just feels like they hand him scripts now and they're like, pump this full of music, like put whatever in it. Right. And so that's where, like, I guess I'm still engaging when I watch like more musicals. When I approach a musical now, my thoughts are like, what are the stories you're trying to tell? We've talked about New York, New York as well, which is technically a musical, right? I mean, that counts.
Yeah.
It's got those bits.
Kind of like Hedwig and the Angry Itch, it has musical performances in it, but it's not like dance numbers and stuff.
Yeah, they're not out in the streets doing whatever. And I'm still trying to find that one movie that I'm like, totally, I guess La La Land does it. I'm like delighted by La La Land, and I'm like, nobody would dance in LA traffic. Ryan knows. I
hate
well, it does sit still enough sometimes,
but I love the rest of it.
Yes.
I've been on the 405 a time you could get out and dance for a little while and it wouldn't be a problem. But yeah, La La Land or Singing in the Rain, right? Like those are both musicals with some like we're just stopping and doing a musical thing, and it works, right? Yeah, it is different.
You like lose yourself in it. And I don't know. I put it to the community out there. Anybody who's listening that loves musicals, I want to know why you love musicals. Don't like justify yourself. That's not what I'm asking. I'm just like, hey, genuinely, I'm trying to figure it out for myself here. I'm still exploring that genre and trying to find my connection with it beyond just, I like the story. I like the characters. The music is good. I'm curious. This probably is just going to be something that I'll never find, but a musical where I don't like the music, but I like the entire movie or the musical itself. Like something that has a challenging concept to it that I might maybe on the first or second watch not like and then grow on me. I don't think that that's out there, but it's just like a challenging piece of the medium would be cool. Because most of them I'm like, I don't like it because the lyrics suck and they're cats and they eat cockroaches or whatever. And like, no, not that way.
Yeah.
Fucking genital cats.
Genital cats. You should go to a doctor if you have genital cats.
Genital cats. I would like that person to really defend jukebox musicals, because like coming to me being like, I wrote new music that has something and even if you don't like it, you can walk away and listen to the soundtrack. Something where you're like, the soundtrack is just Ewan McGregor poorly singing a song I liked. Like what?
I will say, as somebody who has grown to love ABBA, I do kind of like Mamma Mia now. It's growing on me. But Ryan, I also at one point was like, man, they should make a Mamma Mia but for Bloodhound Gang songs. Like that'd be awesome.
Oh, dude, that'd be awesome. Yeah, just really go with it.
Have you guys seen any Beatles movies like Hard Day's Night or Yellow Submarine?
No, I haven't seen any of those. I want to, especially because I watched like an hour and a half documentary about the Beatles recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They're very good, actually. Like, Hard Day's Night is very fun. I think I've only seen those two, Hard Day's Night, Yellow Submarine, but they're really well done, and it's like they did them as a vehicle for their new music, right? They came out like along with the albums, and Hard Day's Night is like taking like kind of the experience of what Beatlemania would have been, them playing themselves, like running around from like place to place ahead of a concert as like just mobs of women were chasing them and stuff, and then like, you know, doing performances of their music on stage or like playing their music over a sequence. And it's a really interesting concept because it is, you know, it's kind of a jukebox musical, but it's their own music, and it's like when the music is coming out, it's like almost a feature length music video. So they're
Yeah.
kind of interesting. And Yellow Submarine has its own entire story. It's animated and it has its own entire story. Like it's basically an allegory for like race relations. It's super interesting.
Dang.
Yeah. You should check out Help. That's I
haven't
really
seen
enjoy
Help.
Help.
Yeah.
That's one I've watched several times. I think I've watched Hard Day's Night a couple of times, but Help I've watched more than that. It's definitely like a cult kind of version, because that's where they're getting into their more like it's more zany comedy, and that's like about the time the Beatles start going like, "Do we fucking do whatever we want?" That's when the door kind of opens.
To bring it back to Hedwig, because we've gotten a little off on the topic, but I think justly so, because Hedwig was so enjoyable to me that I wanted to use it as a lens to look at other musicals to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and like just explore a little bit more on that. But this movie being released in 2001, I didn't look up the date. Is this before or after September 11th?
It was in July. It was before.
Oh, okay. So it was like, you know,
Which
we were on the up.
heard
Things
it.
were kind of a little more positive. Maybe this could find a place, some kind of demographic that would work with. And then I remember, I'm not saying 9/11 is correlated to transphobia.
I probably shouldn't make this joke, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Go for it.
Are you correlating Hedwig's botched sex change with America losing its penis and a couple months later?
God damn it. Well, I think actually kind of in a way there is this question of identity, of American identity, that comes out after September 11th, because it became a rallying cry of, are you with us or are you with them? Like, who are you for or against because of this tragedy? And it is one of those things that I think about, like, how many different societal impacts did that have? Like cultural, like where were we going to be if 9/11 didn't happen, if there wasn't a rallying cry to the like to intensify a lot of like militaristic activity, to seek out, and like, I don't know, I just think about it. I'm like, okay, after that moment, I feel like a lot more people started to get super patriotic, got a lot of truck nuts, got a lot of other things that they were like, we're not going to tolerate these things. We are Americans, and this is what we're American about. And it became this like doubling down of, we need to find our identity and fast, because there's an other out there that needs to have their ass kicked, and that's what we're going to fucking do.
Yeah.
And so yeah, kind of in a way, it's weird that now that you say that, it clicks with me.
Before the World Trade Center became an angry inch.
Yeah. Jeez.
I don't know what to say to that, John, honestly.
Well,
I think that's an interesting comparison.
Fair enough.
I don't really have anything to build on it.
You do. I mean, you bring up an interesting question. I have kind of thought on that. It's interesting putting it next to Hedwig, because there is this like American identity issue, and it's probably more prevalent now than it's ever been. And you can certainly go back to September 11th and the Bush administration and wars, and also Reagan. Like, you can go back a little bit further, and it still was there. But I do remember thinking, you know, probably around July, that Bush was like fucked as a president, that he was never going to get to a second term. And I remember like the week after September 11th being like, it doesn't matter what happens from here. Like, he rallied it around, and that definitely changed.
Mission accomplished, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. It changed our trajectory, where it went, things like that. Right. To have that extended. And it was this patriot identity. It was different. It did suddenly feel like patriotism was way more important, and flags needed to be out and be more important than they were.
Freedom fries.
And
yeah, that's right.
The kind of like rallying back to like more American made, more American, you know, kind of, even though that's made up concept, but it was important to sell.
Yes.
And yeah, I do think about like where were we headed? Where was it? Because that really was, and at the time, like, I point back to Fight Club a lot. In Fight Club, Tyler Durden says, like, we're this generation that doesn't have a major war, didn't have a Great Depression. You know, we're just lost. I don't think he says lost, because then that'd be a lost generation. But essentially that of like, we have nothing to do. We're this like bored generation. And I remember after September 11th, because I watched Fight Club a fuck ton in 2001.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. that I was like, that's sort of meaningless now. Like, that doesn't talk to anyone anymore. And like, even less as a millennial now does Fight Club talk to you. Because it's like, oh no, we've got our wars, we've got our depressions, we all of it. We're done. We're done with all of that. We're a generation with a definition. Please leave us alone now.
Because like, I don't know. This feels like it just coincides. That's where I kind of come from with that angle. Was you were saying like, oh, you thought leading up to that like Bush would never get reelected. And then because of that rallying cry, he was probably also able to push in a lot of policy, push a lot of things that like persecute. I remember like the gay marriage bill and like all the other aspects of the administration that were like, you know, hey, the Conservative Party gets to call a few shots here while they're also, fighting for freedom overseas and whatever else. And so you get this ripple effect where, because he won a second term, like what did that take away in terms of rights? How far back would that have set us in an alternate timeline? Like where would we have been in terms of progressive politics and like thinking about identity? And Hedwig feels like, sort of reminds me of like a Maslow's hierarchy, where it's just like, okay, like once you have this kind of comfort, then you can move on to this next level of comfort. And you're like thinking till you get to the top where it's like, now you can actually philosophize about yourself because you're secure, because you're safe, because you have these things. And in a world where you're made to feel unsafe, you constantly can't consider your neighbor or the empathy that, you know, you should carry for your neighbor at times. And so to me, it kind of speaks like, I don't know, Hedwig came out, and then it sort of like, it didn't do well, but that was pre 9/11 anyway. And then after 9/11, there's like no shot. There's no chance that it could come back. It has a cult following now, and it's on Criterion Channel now, and it's acknowledged in that way. And we're kind of getting back into having more films that explore that. And we've had more and more year over year that go through indie festivals and whatever else and get people's voices out there. But mainstream success has always been, I mean, what fucking Crash won over Brokeback Mountain, the Academy Awards. And like, I don't know how much of that really correlates all to it, but it just reminds me like people need a simple message. That's what like the Bush administration was all about. They need an enemy. And when like Crash came out, the enemy was racism, because we're all post-racial now, and everybody could just sit back and be like, wow, these people suck. I'm not these people.
Yeah, we're not.
I feel good about myself. We did it, everybody. Yeah. But Brokeback Mountain, people were like, I don't know about this.
I'm uncomfortable.
How did two cowboys fall in love out in the mountains? That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, that's a good example. And something like, we've talked about the like military patriotism of Transformers, right? Which is something else that followed. So certainly, yeah, there were these movements in media towards that now is shifting. And it's similarly like the more so, I guess, the early 2000s is sort of like metrosexual conversation. Oh, yeah. There was like an attempt of sort of a cultural shift that then kind of got ignored immediately, but is now coming back of like, hey, it's okay to be, masculine, feminine, like as you want to be, as you feel comfortable being, is, well, I say more accepted in that it's not necessarily fully accepted, but more accepted depending on where you are. The other thing that I always think of this movie, and then it comes back to me and is a story I like to tell, is that when I went to see this movie, the preview for Grizzly Man came on, and I had no frame of reference of what that was, but Werner Herzog is telling me about this man who lived with the bears.
There is no such thing as a secret world of the bears. But for Timothy Treadwell, this bear was a friend, a savior.
He pauses for a moment, and I just said, until those bears ate him, loudly to the theater. And then I think the phrase, like Herzog says it nicer, but pretty much is like, until the bears ate him. Right after that. And then everyone goes, boo to me. And I like sat there for a minute. When it quieted down, I was like, hey, I was right, though. I got to respond back to the... Like, what did you expect was going to happen?
You really put them in a bad mood to watch Hedwig in the Angry Enshrine. I can't believe you would do that to an audience.
Yeah. Yes, and it was not the last time I would upset an audience. So,
I actually have a quick story under like we're talking about Rocky Horror as an influence on this. I actually saw Rocky Horror live for the first time last week.
Oh.
And when we did Rocky Horror on the podcast, we were like, oh yeah, I can see how this would be fun going to a live show. It fucking sucks. Do not go to a live
is it one of those where like the
of
crowd's
Rocky
like
Horror.
way too rowdy?
They like everybody was just cracking jokes the whole time, like shouting at the screen to where like you couldn't tell what was going on, and people would just yell like stupid questions at the screen so that with whatever word Tim Curry would say next would be a funny response. And it was just like everybody was their own little comedian. And I was like, this is just the dumbest fucking thing. Like, you can't even enjoy the movie for what it is. So that was very disappointing. But I imagine that a live showing of Hedwig and the Angry Inch would be more fun.
Yeah. I've heard that Rocky Horror, like what is it called? Is it a shadow play?
Shadowcast?
Yeah, Shadowcast is fun. And I'm interested to see one of the Shadowcast. I feel like the audience would
more
be
interesting.
a little more respectful probably too for a Shadowcast.
Right, yeah.
But yeah. Well, I'm sorry, man. That's just like the room screenings now. Where it's like, I don't need to go to this anymore. Or like,
I see the spoon. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, all right.
There probably was a prime time, right? For each of those. There definitely was a prime time where it was fun and everyone was into it. Now it's like wrapped around again to ironic. Like it's like circled around to ironic twice and it's no longer fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, when that irony horde gets it, that just sucks. Like when the people who just do it because they want to be part of a community are like, yeah, I'm going to go. And then I'll just fucking totally rip on this movie the whole time. I'm like, what are you doing? It's like, no.
Yeah. It was like a master pancake where everyone had a microphone because everyone was just shouting the whole time. It was terrible.
God.
But also, we didn't talk about how I was right.
Oh, yeah. No,
well, that was to keep people, grounded.
Yeah.
For, they were all waiting. Everybody out there listening
Keep
is like,
people in
how is he
suspense.
right? What was it? Yeah, it's now it's built up too much. You have to be right about way more than you're actually right about, Dixon. What did you messaged?
I texted you guys right when I was starting the movie. I said, starting the movie now. Prediction: the Angry Inch is his penis.
That's right. July 8th, 2024 at 8:09 p.m. and then I proceeded to also start the movie at the same time. And when we got to that moment where it's revealed, all I could think was, I hope Dixon's fucking proud of himself. I hope he's happy.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, yep. I was like, what do I reply? And I was like, nah, no, it's good. It's good.
I'm just going to let it be.
Yeah, let it be.
Well, there you go, Dixon. Way to go. Your spidey sense.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Nice. John, would you recommend Hedwig and the Angry Inch?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We didn't really get into, I don't know, like, did we really get into any of the like disagreements or like what the community, like people in the community who don't, like the LGBTQ community, like don't agree with it on, or why they think that
a
it's
little.
presenting?
I touched. I think the only thing was the like that I saw was
that like
using the transition as a way to like potentially cover being gay. And talking about especially previous, right, like older and older, that it was something that was like, oh well, you can't be trans and not have certain like sexual identity. That's like, oh, you must be doing it because of your sexual identity, not because of your gender identity. And certainly movies of that time, there really wasn't that distinction. And I think the movie isn't like it talks about Hedwig, right?
Yeah.
And that situation and his sexual and his gender identity come up, but I don't think the movie makes it to where it's like, oh, this was some attempt to fix that. It was just like literally, especially the way it was shot, where the decision is made. His mom's just like, oh, I know a place to go. Like they just are like, yeah, that's what you got to do. Like there really was no like question or giving Hedwig any opportunity, and it wasn't about his gayness. It was this like, well, here's a way to sneak out of the country.
And they even cover it later. We didn't even talk about that sequence, which I know I interrupted the recommendation here, but there's that sequence later where the Berlin Wall comes down and they have the newscaster being like, the German people always so patient. They get what they want as long as they wait for it. And like sort of that, not so much playing up as like this is, a cruel joke at Hedwig's experience, but it is one of those things where like when you get broken up with and suddenly the radio only plays breakup songs or something like that. It's that the world is kind of a dick at that point. Like this is bullshit. Like I was sort of forced in, or having that remorse and that regret for being forced down a certain path. And so I feel like it's still, to me, handled that with grace and with some still like good frustration and like a lash out, instead of just, this is a plot point where Hedwig will, do this and then move on. Like it is still tied core to the character and the strife that she endures.
And I think everyone in the community could identify with having their parents,
make a decision
or a community, if not their parents, trying to push them in a direction and questioning the situation. So I'm like, this should be something that is familiar and is something that's touched on. And we talked similarly, Rocky Horror has some elements. I mean, there's just elements straight up that are kind of creepy about that have nothing to do with, being trans or whatever. So yeah, I think that I can see why that thought might be there, but to me, it feels like someone read the plot. That I think the people that are like, oh no, it's of its time, probably were more they read the plot and want something to get clicks about, and less about like actually talking about the movie. Because I think anyone I see that like talks about the movie more than just like, oh, it's this, loves it.
There's
no long essay on like why it's problematic. There's only long essays on why it's awesome and why someone identified with it strongly in some way.
Yeah, I think it's still good to have that critical eye to like look at it and ask, is this doing that? It's fine to go through and kind of look at it like that. But yeah, it sounds very similar. I'm not going to say they're in league with the same people who boycotted Furiosa. But I do know there are videos out there where
people... There were people boycotting Furiosa?
Yes, they called it Mad Maxi Pad because they're a bunch of pricks.
Oh my God.
A bunch of fucking misogynists. It's just like, they know they can get the clicks if they just make that outrage culture bullshit. And,
right. Fury Road was starring that character.
Yes, I was going to say, I didn't watch Fury Road.
It's just like,
wow.
All right, there you go. I mean, that just...
Too much women.
Outrage culture and everything it feeds. Anyways, that was a slight aside to, unless you had something else, Ryan.
I would be hard pressed to think that someone could watch this movie and not come away feeling like Hedwig is wrestling with identity and then accepts themselves. Like that's the story, right? Yeah. That's the point. That's a good point to have. It's a good point for the Pride community and everyone else. Like, well, that's true. Like, that's a true thing. And everyone has something that they have wrestled with in their identity. Not, it doesn't have to be sexual or gender identity. Everyone has wrestled with some part of their identity over time. And I can see where someone who was really wrestling with their identity and watches this movie and sees that can have something that they can identify with, right? That you're not really finding in other mediums.
And also Hedwig finds her identity multiple times in the movie, right? Like there's the big scene in the trailer park where she's trying on wigs and like decides to love her femininity and that side of herself, right?
Yeah.
And there's this big moment of like, I put on this wig and I adopted this persona and I decided this is me and like I'm not going back and this is what I want to do now. And so there's a couple triumphant moments of that character finding him or herself at different points in the film, depending on how Hedwig is feeling at that time and what he or she wants to be and wants to express.
Yeah. And one of the songs talks about that, like wearing different wigs and having always had some type of wig on. And that was part of like why I wanted to look at this movie, is because I appreciated the movie Harvey Milk for what it was and as a biopic. And it's, good to have Harvey Milk's story out there in some capacity. But, the situation, decisions around acting there, right? I kind of was like, I don't know that, and I was really trying to press myself to be like, what is something that would actually give you more of the impression that someone might have in the community, and this came to mind, and I feel like it did. I feel like it helps, at least in that way.
There was a movie that I saw at South by a few years ago that it was in 2020 when South by was virtual, and it was called "I'm Gonna Make You Love Me," and it was a documentary about a man who was transgender and was a woman for the majority of her adult life, and then like past middle age, she decided to transition back to being a man again, and it was this really interesting exploration of identity and acceptance. And they were interviewing him as an older man. He's like, yeah, I just never really saw myself as an old woman. I always kind of saw myself as an old man. And the process that he went through, and the friends that he had that stuck by him through the whole process. And it's this fascinating story about somebody who had kind of become somewhat famous in like the underground like gay scene in, I think it was New York. I can't remember exactly. And then, was kind of still trying to be a part of that, but transitioning back to a man. It was kind of like, you can find happiness in different parts of yourself and different identities and different phases of life. So Hedwig kind of reminded me of that movie.
Yeah. And that's why I would recommend it, Ryan, because
all the way back around.
Boom, right back in. I would recommend this movie. The musical numbers are awesome. The camera technique's fucking awesome. We didn't even talk about some of the set pieces, like beyond just them being at dive bars and diners and whatever else. They have that whole like scene where the trailer comes undone.
Yeah,
they like have that awesome rad stage they're playing on. And the overall message, that personal exploration, that identity, and to Dixon's point as well, like finding multiple pieces of your identity as you go that you resonate more with at different times. That speaks to, I think, just how relatable and how resonant it can be beyond even the community that it sort of belongs to. I think that it's a fantastic film, so I would recommend it.
All right. Dixon, would you recommend it?
I would definitely recommend it as well. It's a blast. The songs are really great. The animated sequences are super cool. Again, I just want to reiterate, like the songs are so creative and so packed with story. It's just fascinating to listen to the words in the songs, not just the lyrics. It's not just this big performative drag thing. There is a lot of interesting stuff being discussed within the songs themselves and a lot of cool ideas. So I would definitely recommend people check it out.
Yep, agree. I also would recommend it. I'm glad going back to it that I found that I enjoyed it again. I do really remember enjoying it, and that it still has a good place. I feel like it has a good perspective, a good story. And I remember the music rocking. The music does rock, and I do need to listen to it more and add it into my mix because I fucking loved it this time as well. The music is really, really good. I will say, one of the things that I don't know I fully got, but I would like to see, and listeners, if you have things for us, like I mentioned, I like to see some movies that explore the community and the trans community, especially because I feel like it's very underrepresented. Something that helps paint the feeling of that gender dysphoria in kind of a way that is easy to explain to someone who doesn't. And I know that sounds like, well, how could you? But the example I like to give of something that really clicked for me, Kevin Allison, I think his name is Kevin, who was a comedian in The State, had a podcast I listened to for a while. And at one point he talked about when he realized he was gay when he was young, and he was like 8, I think, something like that. And he watched E.T. and was like, Elliot's hot.
Yeah.
And he was like, I knew something
I thought you were
was
going to say
different.
like, E.T. is hot.
Yeah. And he was like, I knew something was different. Like, he was like, I just knew. And actually, surprisingly, like not that long after that, I had gone to my house and there were some like old books from when I was a kid in like first, second grade. And then I saw it immediately and was like, oh man, when I was a kid, it's just some stupid story. But I was like, I thought the girl in this was hot. And, it was just one of those early like crushes.
Yeah.
Like Chitara is another good one from Thundercats. Or like as a kid, like certainly what I was looking at. And I can then identify and be like, yes, like I did feel that far back And I can see that you could feel that and know that that's something that you're not making up or acting out or whatever, that like you as a kid just have that feeling, right? You have that impression. And that's a really great way to get it across, I think. It really, really clicked with me.
Yeah, there's that empathetic linkage because it's educational beyond like just us sort of watching it and recognizing it. Like if it's something that you feel like might be able to click for family members who are really resilient to the idea or don't get it, like
if you go to grandpa and you're like, were you looking at Daisy Duke or Luke Duke? It's important to know.
Yeah.
That's funny. Ryan, have you seen Tangerine by Sean Baker?
No, I have not. Yeah, there are a few that I want to get to, and that is one.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's about trans sex workers in LA. It's also a Christmas movie.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a good one to watch if you want to watch some more films about with trans characters.
Well, that brings us to a close. I have been your host, Ryan King. If you want a movie with some identity issues, watch this. If you want a movie where a guy gets eaten by a grizzly bear, watch The Grizzly Man. Joining us as always.
Or The Revenant. Watch that.
Or The Revenant, yes. Joining us as always.
John Garcia. There are your thoughts, folks. We gave them to you after we had a discussion. So, yeah.
I'm going to have to go back to the tape immediately after this, yeah. And also...
Michael Dixon, thanks for putting up with our bullshit.
Hey there, movie buffs, TV toughs, and all listeners in between. John here from the Afterthoughts podcast. I just wanted to drop in at the end of this episode and say thanks for listening. If you've got afterthoughts of your own to share, hit us up. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Afterpod, or jump into a conversation on our Discord server. You can find info for this and more at theafterpod.transistor.fm. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.